it was our job to get ahead of the claims, so to speak, because they might not have had loads of shares, but you can guarantee if the one right person shares it and it just blows up and becomes this whole new conspiracy theory.
Welcome to Needlestack, the podcast for professional online research. I'm your host, Matt Ashburn, and that is a fact that cannot be debunked.
And I'm Jeff Phillips, tech industry veteran and curious to a fault. Today, we're continuing our series, our super interesting series, by the way, on fact checking and debunking with another great guest. Today, we have Nick Hardinges. Nick is a fact checker based in London with Reuters, and he's a former digital news editor. So welcome to the show, Nick.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Love your work that we've seen online. Why don't we kind of start at the beginning here? Tell us a little bit about your role at Reuters and how you ended up on the fact-checking team.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So my role at Reuters is to basically source claims, source misinformation, and write articles that can correct that misinformation. How I got onto the team is, well, I was previously working, as you said, as a digital news editor, working at the coalface, addressing breaking news and getting through a lot of stories, not necessarily in a lot of detail, but getting through lots of stories in a day. You could get through like 10 stories in a day. But when I left that job, this opportunity opened itself up to me, and it offered what was basically the opposite of what I was doing in that former job. So it was offering me a chance to go to dig deep when it comes to writing stories, to uncover truth, leave no stone unturned. And every rose-eyed journalist comes out of university wanting to write things that aid truth and information and kind of further those causes. And so that's exactly why this job just felt like something I had to take up, and have absolutely loved doing it since. And so like I could be spending now like 3 weeks on stories rather than 2 hours or less than 2 hours. So having the opportunity to really dig deep into claims, and correct things that need correcting, and sometimes quite dangerous information was just an opportunity I simply couldn't turn down.
So, Nick, I'm wondering, how do you decide whether or not to fact check a specific claim or story that might be out there? Are there specific criteria or thresholds that you evaluate?
Yeah, of course. There's a few different things that we do that we need to look at before establishing whether or not we're going to address a claim. One of the first things is how harmful that claim might be. We've seen with COVID myths and disinformation some really quite harmful claims that have circulated on social media. And so if we see something that we think is going to put people off a certain course of action, or potentially lead people down a certain course of action as well, we that piques our interest, and we look at that and think, okay, that needs addressing, because that could genuinely be very harmful to members of the public. It could, in some, it's not being too hyperbolic, but it could be a case of life and death sometimes with some of the information that people absorb. And so we need to ensure that the truth is out there and that falsehoods are addressed. So that's one of the things that we look at. Another thing could be how widely a story has been shared on social media. So if we're seeing something that's got thousands of shares on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, it's something that's going to need addressing, especially if it's wrong. Because, to borrow an old saying, a lie can make its way around the world before the truth has even put its boots on. We need to make sure if something has already got out there and is gripping people and striking fear into people in some cases, we need to be the people who step in and kind of calm that down, address that, get the truth out there. And with a company like the size of Reuters as well, what we say brings quite a lot of heft to a story. And so people respect what we have to say. And so it's really important that we get our side and the truth out there for that reason. A couple of other criterion that we use, we'd address claims that are topical as well. So we've seen with the Ukraine-Russia conflict, loads of claim surfacing, and back in February, for us that day, February the 24th, was really busy because we just saw all sorts of videos surfacing on social media that some of them would be from video games, some of them would be from separate former conflicts. And so it was our job to get ahead of the claims, so to speak, because they might not have had loads of shares, but you can guarantee if the one right person shares it and it just blows up and becomes this whole new conspiracy theory, if we haven't addressed it ourselves, that there's a danger of that happening. So if something's topical, that's another reason why we would address it. And then also, lastly, the status of the person sharing that misinformation. I won't name names, but there are certain people that we follow on a daily basis who we know to be spreaders of misinfo or just kind of misleading stories, headlines, etc. And so if we see that person coming up with a new theory, new claim, it's important for us also to get on that again early before it gets out of hand and start spreading to all corners of the internet. Because as I said, once these things reach those corners, it's quite hard to put a lid on it. But being a company like Reuters, I think we're one of the best placed organizations to be able to put a lid on those claims.
That makes a lot of sense. And there's almost, I mean, all four of those points, Nick, and including there's almost like a first mover advantage there that's going to take hold and people, kind of immediately make a decision. But all four of those, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think we've mentioned to you, we have a lot of practitioners that listen in on our podcast. Do you think you could maybe walk us through how you fact check something from start to finish, or maybe is there an example of something you've worked on in the past that could kind of tell our listeners, how did it start and how did it finish from a fact checker's perspective?
Yeah, of course. So there's, we can have really short claims that we address, or as I said beforehand, we could have things that we're working on for 2 or 3 weeks. I think I won't take 2 or 3 weeks to tell the story, but there's one that I'm particularly proud of, and it got a lot of focus on it, and I'm just really glad that we addressed this. So back in December of last year, there was a list going around of 108 FIFA footballers who had supposedly, it was purportedly 108 FIFA footballers who had died, and this proved that there was a link between the COVID-19 vaccines and athlete deaths. Now, I started seeing that claim surfacing on social media, and so I brought it up in a morning meeting that we have and explained why I think it was something that was important for us to get on top of. And yeah, the people in my team agreed, because it was at a time when we were seeing some famous collapses on sports fields. I know Christian Eriksen collapsing during the Euros in last year. Yeah. Certainly got a lot of people worried. And there were some other incidents that we were seeing. Another one being another footballer or soccer player called Sergio Aguero, who was kind of clutching his chest on the pitch one day. And we were seeing fans collapsing in the stands as well. So it was something that was topical, and it was something that needed to be addressed. So we started seeing this claim being the engagement was through the roof. There were thousands of people discussing it, believing it, and spreading it. And so, yeah, it's got all the hallmarks for something that we would need to address. So I started investigating, and what I found was that this list didn't relate specifically to just FIFA registered footballers. There were factual inaccuracies in the list. It was it was all over the place. Where it originated, it surfaced in a Hebrew language article online, and so it was all written in Hebrew. And the claim was 108 professional footballer athletes, coaches, I think, college and youth sports players had died since December 2020, and it was very heavily implying that this was to do with the COVID-19 vaccines. So what I did was I translated the list and checked all 108 people who were on that list. That included, and what I found was that it included people from all sorts of sports, whether it be archery to weightlifting, football to rugby, and they were all sorts of levels as well. There were some professionals in there, complete amateurs. I remember there was a teacher, I think, a golf caddy, and maybe even just a doctor.
You're looking up all 108 names. Yeah.
Yeah, every single one. There was a spreadsheet that I created. So I had written proof that I'd gone through every single story and checked what had happened to them. And so some of these people just had no connection, a real connection to established professional sport. So immediately you're rightly skeptical about that. And then so I started looking through news reports about these deaths. Some were caused by heart issues. Some had no cause established. The reports just didn't offer anything. So to jump to a conclusion early was just wrong. Other causes were prior COVID infections. One person had a traumatic brain injury. I think there were a couple of suspected suicides. One even took place before the pandemic had begun. So this wasn't a comprehensive list of 108 FIFA registered footballers, but that's the phrasing that's being spread in misinformation circles. 108 FIFA footballers died in 6 months. So what I did is I spoke with the MHRA, the Medicine Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. I've probably got that wrong, but we'll call it the MHRA. In the UK, I spoke with FIFA, lots of governing bodies, sporting governing bodies from around the world, World Athletics included in that, a few national governing bodies, the Rugby Football League here in the UK, the National Rugby League down in Australia. And I spoke to a charity in the UK called Cardiac Risk in the Young and some experts, cardiologists on top of that. And they all confirmed that they had seen no links between, not to put words in all of their mouths, but the long story short is that we found that there was no established link, or they hadn't seen reports linking deaths, players collapsing, etc., to COVID vaccines. And so in the end, after going through this list, with a fine tooth comb, speaking to these experts, who told me that there were just no papers that would prove this, no established reputable papers that would back that claim up, we were able to write a fact check on it. And so the fact check, it got written, edited, and whatever, as any news article would do. And when it got published, it featured really prominently on Twitter. And this is the bit that I'm just super proud of, and the work that we've put in just was it all kind of paid off in this one moment. I just happened to be going to a football match myself that evening that it got published, and it ended up on Twitter. And I was going to watch West Ham United play at their home stadium, and was that there are dozens of queues that you can join to go into this stadium, right? And I ended up in one behind these two guys who were just talking about people collapsing at football matches and players collapsing at football matches. And one of them was just like, yeah, I've heard there's been like hundreds of people dying in the footballing world. And his mate said to him, no, have you not seen they've kind of corrected that. There's been some fact check about it, and there's no established link between the two. And it was just one of those moments where you're like, wow, I could have stood anywhere, and I've stood here and I've heard them talking directly about an article that I wrote, and it hadn't been written by anyone else at that point. And therefore, it was my work that they would have seen. So I did interrupt them and ask them where had they seen it. They confirmed where they'd seen it. And it filled me with a real sense of pride, because it was just that moment where you see the real world impact of the work that we're doing. And I think that's really important for people to remember, because there is a real world impact. These stories that we write, these articles that we write, can change people's mindsets, or can confirm to people what the truth and what misinformation looks like.
So, Nick, you're part of a larger team that is dedicated to nothing but fact checking, and that's really important work that you guys are doing. But I'm wondering, as consumers of media, as consumers of information, are there any tips that we should be aware of? Are there tips that you would give to average people out there to discern whether or not something may or may not be misinformation or something that requires fact checking?
Yeah, so I'd recommend people just have a healthy skepticism of stuff that they're seeing online. You don't want to be skeptical about absolutely everything you see, because that can lead you down some rabbit holes, which leads towards misinformation. But so long as if you see a headline, a video, an image that just seems too good to be true, or if it feels like it's been posted to drum up an emotional response, just double check that. Google's a couple of clicks away, and if there's an event going on in the world and you see some video supposedly from that event, you can go online and check to see whether the situation you're seeing in that video matches up to what the news reports are saying. Because quite often, what people say is that the news is covering these things up, but actually, if these situations, these fantastical situations that are misinformation, were happening, news outlets would be all over those stories. The news outlets would be covering these stories. So if you see something that's too good to be true that isn't being covered by the mainstream media, then there's probably a good chance that it's not something relevant to that event. I'd also recommend, if you see a grainy footage in a video, that's another one, or a grainy image in a world where we've got camera phones that have got just the highest quality pictures on them,
right?
Then double check that as well, because if you're not, quite often these grainy images they're grainy because the person sharing them wants there to be a bit of doubt, and they don't want to. The grainier an image, the more difficult it is for us fact checkers to track as well. So be skeptical about things like that too. Crazy headlines that you see from newspapers, from news outlets, whatever, you can search those easily on Twitter, Facebook, Google. And so if you're seeing a headline that seems just to be drumming up a fear about, be it vaccines, be it the conflict in Ukraine with Russia, be it about immigration, whatever, you just think about why that headline has been created that way, and then go and check that headline actually exists. That's one way that that the everyday user can prevent themselves from falling for or sharing misinformation themselves.
That makes a lot of sense, to have a healthy sense of criticism.
And Nick, all of that is really good information and things to keep in mind. The other thing I would probably add to that is that it's incredibly important that as consumers of media, that we maintain an awareness of what triggers us individually, right? So, for example, if you're reading an article, if you're reading something in the newspaper or online or something that's shared on social media, and it elicits a strong response, a strong emotional response from you, that might be something that could trigger in you some additional critical thinking there to further evaluate that information. What is the motivation of the author of this information? Are there certain phrases that are in there that are designed to evoke some kind of response from me and to either sow division or perhaps just to make it more salacious than the information really is?
I think even when we were talking beforehand, you also mentioned, it's not a bad idea to follow and read both sides of any argument and try to see where it's likely that the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? Which seems
Exactly. As you say, follow people with differing opinions because, as you say, quite often the truth will fall somewhere in between those areas. And if it doesn't fall in between those areas, I can guarantee you that journalists will be seeking that story out. And quite often we deal with people who are on the fringe of, say, medicine and science. There's usually a good reason for them being considered fringe. And so, yes, do your own research with the news, but there are reasons why there are established and trusted outlets like ourselves covering stories.
So, Nick, as we start to wrap up today, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners and the viewers that are out there?
Yeah, I would. There are a couple of things I would say to anyone who has an interest in fact checking. Actually, if it's something that you want to give a go, I'd completely encourage it. The skills that you learn in fact checking can be used in all sorts of walks of life, and you really do get just a fascinating experience of what the internet can offer as well. If you did, follow as many misinformation accounts as possible, maybe on a separate social media to your usual personal social media, because you don't necessarily want to blend the two too much. And follow fact-checking organizations because we're doing important work and we do our best to leave no stone unturned. And we're very, very proud of that integrity and that honesty and accuracy that we offer. And I can only speak for myself here, but working in fact checking has completely changed kind of my approach to journalism, and it's made me mature as a journalist. So if you have any opportunity to give it a go, whether it's on an amateur level or, working in a company like Reuters, then I can only, encourage you to do it because it's been a game changer for me as a journalist, and the skills that I've learned in this will just, they'll see me through to the end of my career, which hopefully will be long and prosperous.
Thanks very much to our special guest, Nick Hardinges. Thank you so much, Nick, for being with us today. If you at home liked what you heard, you can subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcast. You can also watch episodes and obtain other information on our website at authentic8.com/needlestack. That's authentic with the number 8.com/needlestack. Also, be sure to follow us if you're on Twitter at NeedlestackPod. We'll be back next week with an interview with David Agronovich of Meta, and he'll be discussing disinformation, misinformation, and efforts to disrupt these threats that are out there. You don't want to miss it, and so we'll see you then.